I feel like for a lot of people, 2020 is presenting each of us with unique sorrow. My unique sorrow was that I didn't get to like end something well that I had started 20 years ago.
Between belief and unbelief, faith and doubt, certainty and uncertainty, there is space. Each of us is thrown into this place to love, to ache, to rage, to heal, and to experience the wonder and the mystery of being. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Wonder and the Mystery of Being. This is episode 9. It's called Chasing the Beauty. And my guest today is Mike Donehey, who is the lead singer, or was the lead singer of another Christian band alongside what I was doing. And his band was called 10th Avenue North. They're a band that we toured with quite a bit, and I got to know Mike really, really well over the years. And he is one of the most beautiful people I've ever met. And I mean, like, in his spirit, like you get this sense when you're talking with Mike that well, at least this is my experience, that he's fully there in the moment with you. And that's kind of rare. We don't get that with everyone. So I wanted to have a conversation with Mike about a number of things. He's someone who I really respect when it comes to his songwriting, when it comes to the way he looks at life, thinks about family, career, the way that he blends some of the parts of the Christian music industry that maybe feel a little bit yucky, the way that he navigates those areas, whether it's finances or relationships, those kinds of things. And he actually recently started his own podcast called Chasing the Beauty. We talk about that a little bit. And yeah, I just wanted to ask him about his perspective on faith and culture and beauty, and why he's making a podcast focused on finding beauty. So we had this conversation. Full disclosure, I recorded it a few months ago, and I had just started recording these conversations. This was maybe one of the first things I recorded for this podcast. So I was still getting the hang of it. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see that there's times where the video doesn't really match up very, very great with the audio. I had some issues there. If you're listening on the podcast, no issues audio-wise. It's just sort of for video. So with that, I just don't feel like I need to give you a long intro on this one. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Mike Donehey. First off, I saw on Instagram that you yourself are launching a podcast like imminently, like right now.
Yeah,
right?
Thursday.
By the time anyone hears this conversation, Thursday will have come and gone. So Mike now has a podcast out. It's called Chasing Beauty, right?
Chasing the beauty.
No,
not
the
just
beauty.
any beauty.
Just
the
beauty.
No
Dude.
big deal.
Well, that word makes a difference.
It does.
But I mean, I wanted to like chat with you here about so many things. And you and I have known each other for probably 10, 12 years, something like that.
Long enough.
Yeah, the first interaction I remember ever having was, well, I think we interacted slightly before this, but our first extended interaction was Rock and Worship Roadshow 2012?
Yeah, that would have been it. 2011, 2012? I think it might have been 2011.
Or was
2010?
It? Oh, no, it was earlier than that because we did Roadshow twice. Was it 2010?
It was.
You know what? I think it was 2009. We're just going to keep going back. But here's my memory, and this is a good place to start, I feel like. My memory of you was, because you guys were... you were the opening band on the tour. You were like
That's right.
You weren't like a new band in the sense that you weren't new to music, but you were sort of getting started in those circles of Christian music that we've both found ourselves in a way,
Yeah.
right?
New on the scene.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I remember right from the very first show, I remember being like, this doesn't feel like an opening band. And I just, like you have people that are green and then you have people that just happen to be in a green position and they're just ready to go. And that was my impression of you from the get-go. I remember like, cause the way that you would engage with people was so masterful. And it's something you continue to do to this day. And it's not just that you're like, okay, I'm going to sound like I'm gushing here, but this is just something.
I like it.
Anybody,
no, I prefer
good.
gushing. I'll take it.
But anyone that knows you is gonna know what I'm talking about when I say this. It's not that you're smart, although you're smart. It's not that you're kind, although you're kind. It's that whenever I talk to you, there's this like twinkle in your eye that gives me the impression that there's some sort of like cosmic joke at work and you're in on it. And like,
I think that's the best compliment I've ever received.
and
you nailed it.
So like there's something there that drew me to you. And I see other people being drawn to you in the same way. And that's why, I mean, it's those people that I really love having conversations with because it always takes you places that you don't expect. So that's kind of why what's one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you today. And so thanks for being willing to do this.
I feel like the conversation's done now. I'm going to go take a nap. Just
Podcast
feel good about myself.
Finished. Well, so, I mean, for those of you, for those people that might be listening or watching that don't know you, I mean, you grew up in Florida-ish, or I know you went to school in Florida, but maybe take us back, man. Take us like the journey of Mike Donehey from birth to now in like in a short version.
Yeah. My parents met at a party and one thing led to another. No.
That tends to happen.
That I was born in Nebraska in Omaha. Yes. Midwest. My dad was in the Air Force, met my mom. And then then they moved to Northern Virginia when I was still very young. So I grew up near DC and my dad worked for an organization called National Right to Life. And I grew up in a town called Fredericksburg, Virginia, the home place, the childhood home of George Washington, most notably. And then when I was 18, I went to college in South Florida at Palm Beach Atlantic University and consequently started the band and stayed down there for almost a decade before moving to Nashville to do music full time. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a good nutshell, man.
Thank you.
I haven't witnessed very many people that can sum up their life that quickly.
Just don't bore them, hit them with the important parts and move on.
This is the biographical version of Don't Bore Us, Get to the Chorus.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things I wanted to ask you about, well, first, why don't you tell me about Chasing the Beauty and where that idea came from? Because that's sort of like one of the more like prominent features of your life in this moment as we're speaking, as far as your career and thought goes. So maybe kind of tell me how that came about and how that's playing out in your life right now.
Yeah. At first glance, I guess Chasing the Beauty could kind of sound like blind, dumb optimism. I'm going to look for beauty even when it's hard. Everything's so great. Butterflies and rainbows. And, but that's why the word is chasing the beauty, that it's actually this sort of active wrestling pursuit to find what is actually beautiful, even in unexpected, uncomfortable places. That there's an elegance, right? Like anyone can be pessimistic.
Yeah.
It feels like the slide of our souls is like, if you do nothing, you don't just bend toward optimism and hope, you kind of slide toward cynicism and despair. And so this is my effort to relook even at events in my own life and in the lives of friends and family and say, okay, at first blush, that was terrible what happened. But let's look a little deeper and go, oh, actually look at all this beauty that came out of it. I guess there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called David and Goliath.
Oh yeah, I know it.
And that was really like because I've been wanting to do a podcast for 10 years and you're always like, but what's my place in this realm? Like, what's my angle? And
you're also fighting that sort of interior voice of like, well, everyone's doing a podcast. Am I like jumping on the bandwagon? Did I miss it? Am I late? Why is my voice needed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all you can do. So I wrote a book last year and I didn't write a book because I thought anyone needed my book. I wrote a book because there is a group of people who listen to me. Whether they ought to or not is still up for debate. But I go, since there's people listening to me, I'm going to write you people a book. It wasn't this grand, I'm going to write a New York Times bestseller. It was, I'm going to try to take responsibility for the influence that certain people have given me in their lives and try to do something beautiful and good for those people. And so as I retold because my book is kind of my life story a bit. And as I did that exercise, I went, oh, this could be a place I could live for a long time, discussing a lot of different topics.
Yeah.
And that kind of gave birth to the podcast.
Well, it seemed like, even in your time with 10th Avenue North, and we'll sort of talk about maybe the arc of that time in the band for you too. Even in that time, it always felt like to me, it felt like your songs and your music were vehicles for you to talk about things that really mattered to you. Like, and I kind of wanted to ask you about this. Like, I always felt like in the music business in general is this weird mashup of art and commerce, right? And then you get into Christian music and you add a third element of ministry. So you've got art, business, and ministry. And these three things are present in every Christian band, every Christian artist, every Christian career, dealing with these things. And everybody blends it a little bit differently, right? Like you have some artists that are like, we're a business first, and then maybe ministry comes second and art dead last. And you don't have to use much imagination to figure out what maybe artists you might categorize that way. Or then you have other artists that it's like all about the art, like I think of John Mark McMillan, who's a great example of like, I don't think that I don't know how many of his career decisions were based on business ideas, but it seems like he's been very artful. And then you have other people that are like, ministry, that is the thing I'm doing. I don't care if it's the most artful thing. I don't care if it makes money. I just want to serve God and tell people about Jesus. And there's a blend of those three in every Christian band or Christian artist. And so one of the things I always noticed for you is that it seemed like your point of view was always like, how can we address things thoughtfully and talk about issues that people might struggle to talk about? How can we get there in a way that's really beautiful? And it seemed, just from the outside, it seemed like you got more and more bold in that endeavor as time went on. And toward the end, especially, you released, I think, was it like the EP Things We're Afraid to Say, or is that?
The Things We've Been Afraid to Say.
There we go.
Yeah.
See, I'm always like 5% off
That's
on
close enough.
the title of everything you do. So, so maybe, I mean, like, what's your perspective on Christian music as a space to tackle hard questions? And has that been something that has come naturally to you, or do you feel like it's been something you had to really fight for? Does it feel like it was conducive to that, or something you had to sort of barrel through?
I never felt like it was barreling through. I definitely felt like the more specific you get, that's the dance of writing songs, is you want to be specific enough where it actually has weight and credibility. And actually there's a story there. Like when I co-write with other artists, they're like, I want to write a song about this. I go, okay, yeah, but what does that for you? Because if it doesn't have a place in your personal story, it's not going to land for other people.
Yeah.
So there's like a personal thing we have to bring. But with certain subjects, as you try to tackle them as songs, the more specific you get, the harder it is to be really commercial. So it wasn't that I felt like I was barreling through. It was just waking up to, okay, if I write a song this specific, there's music, and then Christian music is a subgenre of music. And then when I start doing a subgenre within a subgenre, I mean, there just isn't that many people who could listen to it.
Right. So, it's like you're narrowing the audience down as far as who this is going to be relevant to every time you go down a level. It's like a Daniel Tosh joke.
Yeah.
Daniel Tosh he's a comedian. He always says, I like to take every joke and make it more and more and more specific until it's about only one person in the audience, and everyone else I've just lost. That's what he says.
Yes. That's kind of how it can be. So when we were opening up for Mercy Me on that last tour we did with them, and we're playing a song from this record you mentioned, that's about realizing that you and your wife are still attracted to other people, and that being honest about that is actually really healthy for your marriage. Like trying to convey that song in the midst of a night where people pretty much just came to like close their eyes and
sing I
feel
Can Only
pimples.
Imagine and Love Is Here.
Like, I remember one time I was explaining the song. I was like, how many of y'all been married? And the crowd's like, yeah, all right. And there's like, how many been married a long time? Woo, all right. Marriage can be hard, right? Yeah. And you know how sometimes like you're attracted to other people than your spouse. And my friend said he was back by the soundboard, and there's this one lady with each thing I said, she's like, oh yeah. Oh, preach it, bro. Oh yeah. And she's clapping and clapping. And then when I said that, she's like, oh yeah. Oh no.
Right.
And, so you kind of, that didn't land. But then we get stories. There's two couples who write us after the show and go, we had been resisting counseling and we're probably on a road to divorce. Then when you set up that song and talked about it, we got into marriage counseling that week. And we just want to thank you for saying that. And so it isn't like when you write specific tough things like that, it isn't that you're scared to write songs about that. You just know that this isn't going to land for the majority of people. And so just being content with, I'm not writing this song to be a hit.
Yeah.
I'm writing this song to serve a space.
Yeah.
And that's different.
Well, and that touches on something too that I always wrestled with. And you and I have written songs together. Actually one of my favorite songs I was ever a part of, Through the Fire, was a song that you and I wrote together. And you've sang it, come and joined us and sang it with us on stage. And I remember giving you the mic, but no in-ears. So no hope of really being able to hear yourself. And then you still crushed it.
That's like half my career, bro.
But, I feel like I always felt this tension, the way you described this pressure to write a hit. Because, this is one of the things that I enjoy talking publicly with people like yourself, because we can sort of pull back the curtain a little bit for people and go, this is what the experience is like for the people that you listen to. And like in all of my years songwriting with Hawk and all your years songwriting, both in 10th Ave and outside of it, there's this expectation when you go to a writing session that, okay, we're going to write a song today. And especially if there's people in the room that are like professional songwriters that are not artists per se, they're not like an artist that's a public figure or whatever. There's this knowledge that everyone in the room knows the only way today is going to financially make any sense is if we try to write a hit, right?
Yes.
And so, like you just explained, like to write a hit requires taking a certain kind of approach that's hopefully going to be broad enough that you can capture the most people. Mm-hmm. And so it sort of disincentivizes people from writing songs like the one you just talked about. And I remember like going into writing sessions, and I learned very quickly that like if I went in and I was like, hey, I really want to write a song that just crushes live, and I don't care if it's a radio single. Like the writers that I'd be writing with that day would be like, oh, so a song that's like not going to make any money then.
or they go totally.
Yeah.
But I think we can like make this a little more like this,
right. Right.
You don't want to lose everybody.
Right.
So there's ways to, and we're going to make it a hit.
Right. I always felt, I always felt that tension there, because once I realized what that meant for the producers and writers that I was working with, I would feel bad going into a writing session doing with any goal other than to write the biggest song ever. Because I would be like, I'd be like, am I wasting their time?
Right. And it's really important, I think, in the creative process to work with people who legitimately would love to have a hit, but are also in it with you to go. And if we don't write a hit, as long as we write a song that's important for you, like I'm in. Our friend Dan Bremnes, I just agreed to like help him write a bunch for his new record. And I said to him, he's like, now listen, I don't even know what kind of record I'm trying to make. And I said, perfect. I said, let's just take it a song at a time and just figure out the songs you need to write,
Yeah.
And
well, that's because you're writing with a twinkle in your eye, Mike. There's a twinkle.
There's a twinkle that, maybe it's the Irish twinkle. When you first said that about the twinkle, like a cosmic joke, my mind went to this story in a Brennan Manning book I read one time, where it's these two Irish men walking along the sea. And the one older man, he stops and just throws his arms back and laughs. And he says, "The Father is quite fond of me. Isn't it amazing? Yes, the Father's quite fond of me." And the times I feel the twinkle is when I don't give in to the scarcity mindset, that there's not going to be enough, that I'm not going to be taken care of, that I gotta work and get what's mine. And the twinkle comes back when I go, no, I'm going to trust that there's abundance. I'm going to trust that I'll be taken care of. I'm going to trust that the Father is quite fond of me. And it allows me to kind of loosen my grip on, even in this case, manipulating a song into a certain way that I think it should be, instead of letting the song teach us what it wants to teach us that day,
Yeah, that's good, man. I went through a season where that sort of idea of the spirit of abundance versus the spirit of scarcity, where like when I sort of recognized that duality and like how often am I operating in the spirit of abundance and how often am I operating in the spirit of scarcity? Like when I when I sort of started to recognize that, it changed the way I saw everything. Like all of my motivations, the way that I was living my life out, the decisions I was making, like, am I fearing that this good thing that's coming to me right now, am I living in fear that will be the last good thing that ever comes my way and I have to hold on to it and I have to have a tight grip? Or am I assuming that this is just one thing in a string of beautiful things that's going to happen in my life?
Yeah.
And I can just let it come and let it go. And
have you read Parker J. Palmer? Do you know who he is?
No.
I think it's Parker J. Palmer.
Hold on,
He's a Quaker philosopher, and he's got a little book called Let Your Life Speak that a friend of mine gifted to me the other day. And it's kind of in line, if you read Frederick Buechner at all, it's kind of in line with Buechner's book, Listening to Your Life. And he's got this beautiful I actually wrote a song called Abundance early on in the pandemic after reading this. And his challenge was, hey, listen, it is much more important for you to believe in abundance than you realize. And not just for you, but for everyone around you. Because when you live out of scarcity, you create the very thing you're afraid of for everyone around you.
Yeah.
And I watched it play out at the beginning of the pandemic when there's no toilet paper anywhere.
In a very whimsical but serious kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the truth is there was enough toilet paper. More people weren't pooping all of the sudden when the pandemic hit. But because everyone started believing that there wouldn't be any more toilet paper, they started buying more toilet paper than they would usually buy.
Yeah.
And because they were believing scarcity, they created scarcity for other people.
Yeah.
And so there's a really profound effect that when I believe in scarcity, I create scarcity. When I believe in abundance, I create abundance.
Yeah. I remember seeing that I used to live in Nashville. I live in San Diego now, but you live in Nashville. And I remember a few times there would be a rumor that would spark somewhere that Nashville was about to run out of gas. Do you remember this?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then...
Well, I lived in South Florida where there's hurricanes.
Oh,
so
yeah. But
you saw it.
Were you living in Nashville yet when that stuff happened in Nashville?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So like there'd be a rumor that Nashville, the whole city was about to run out of gas. And it wouldn't be true at that moment at first, but then everyone would go and get gas and Nashville would run out of gas and it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. So yeah, I agree with that fully on a much more fundamental, transcendent level. It's like we do this, the way that we look at the world and the lenses through which we, look at our circumstances. They do have a way of influencing our behavior, which then in turn influences the world we live in, which comes full circle back into our perception. And that whole spirit of abundance versus spirit of scarcity thing, that just absolutely rocked my world. I felt like in Christian music too, I felt that at play. I remember going to, and I know you've had these experiences too. Like I remember going to like awards shows or like, and the big public award shows were one thing, but it was the private songwriter award shows that really got to me.
Yeah.
Because I remember it was like, okay, well, who's hot this year? Like, and it's this very small community of songwriters. Like I don't know my tenses anymore, but a CSAC writer. And so I'd go to this CSAC, awards. I can't remember. Are you CSAC or are you BMI? ASCAP.
I'm CSAC.
You're CSAC.
I'm CSAC also.
So I remember going to these things and, you like who's hot, who's killing it right now. And you'd have a conversation with people and everyone would be sort of looking over their shoulder to be like, is there someone more important I need to be talking to right now? Like, I kind of want to set up is that a lawnmower?
Oh, it's a blower.
Oh,
I live in a neighborhood. There's real life happening around me that I can't curate.
Yeah, that's all good. No, but what I thought about in that setting was this sense of like there's only so many hits available on the radio this year. Only so many people can have a number one. And for people that listen to Christian music, they might not realize how small a community it really is. Everybody knows everybody to a degree. And there is something true about the fact that there can only be so many number one radio songs. So if you put all of your hopes and dreams, if you pin it all on Christian radio, it's actually true that only so many people can win in a given year.
Right.
So it's like you could see how there's a nugget of truth to this fearful approach of scarcity.
Yes.
How did you manage to? Because some people, when you talk to them, you can sense that fear. Like, if I don't get a number one this year, I'm done. If I don't get a number one this year, or 2 number ones or 3 number ones, that I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage. You know?
Yes.
But then there's other people like yourself that I never was able to sense that same sense of scarcity or fear. I never got that from you. And there's a number of people like that seem to be able to sort of transcend that feeling. And it wasn't just people who were like making lots of money. There's some people that I knew were not making a lot of money, but somehow still were able to operate out of that spirit of abundance. So like, do you have any thoughts on how that came about in your own heart? And
it's a constant conversation, and I get a lot of help from my wife. Because even as my band just ended and I'm starting a solo career doing music, and there's this huge voice in my head that basically is like, I'm going, what if I don't have any hits? What if no one listens to my solo music and I'm not able to make a career out of doing solo music?
Right.
And then there's this other voice in my head that's like, how dare you demand that after all the attention people gave you for 15 years or 20 years, however long, now you're demanding they give you more of their attention as a solo artist, right? So there's this, I am just an absolute egomaniac needing everyone's attention. And then the real fear of, but I have to make money somehow. And my wife has been so helpful. P.S. As you hear this blower, it's my next door neighbor. There's a guy walking back and forth with a blower right now. He's just like, what was that, Mike? Wah. I don't think you'll hear it in my microphone because I'm watching. I've got a limiter on.
It's real life, man. This is like, we've both got kids and we're working around, when you have kids, you learn to let some stuff go.
Bro, the facade has fallen.
Oh yeah.
So I was going to say, I want to say this as succinctly as I can.
Sure.
Scarcity and abundance is about properly identifying what is need and want. Mm-hmm. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So when you go into the writer thing, you're like, I need a hit to pay my mortgage. This is where my wife is really helpful. I go, babe, I have to write a hit to pay my mortgage. And she goes, why? I was like, well, if I don't write a hit and we don't get the money, then we can't pay our mortgage. She's like, well, you could do something else to make the money to pay the mortgage. I'm like, no. If I spend all this time trying to write songs to pay the mortgage, then if I don't have a hit, then I've lost that time and now we can't pay the mortgage. And then she goes, so? What do you mean so? So we sell the house. Wait, what? Yeah, don't we have collateral in the house? We could sell the house and move into a camper. No, we can't. You know, if you follow the logic enough, you start realizing, oh, I want to be venerated as one of these number one songwriters, but I don't need to be. I want to have all the hits, but I don't need the hits. And if I do need a want, that is what I think when the Old Testament scriptures are talking about idolatry, it's sort of a buzzword, but I think what it's getting at is when you start talking about your wants as though they're needs.
Yeah.
Like, I can't be happy if this.
Yeah.
And you start peeling back the layers on that and you go, that thing, even if you got that, it's not going to make you happy anyway. So
that's so good, man. Even talking about idolatry, like I've been on this journey the last couple years of like rethinking, everything basically.
Really?
Yeah. But one of the things that I've discovered is like, I've been through a period where there's a lot about Christianity and spirituality and religion that I was just like really anxious to move beyond. And I've just discovered that's not so easy. And because there's things in the Bible, in Christianity and in spirituality and religion that are touching on something that's really true. And I just happened to like randomly go back and like take a fresh look at the 10 Commandments the other day. And I was like, the commandment about graven images, I was like, oh man, how much of my life have I spent worshiping graven images, which just means putting something in the highest place that has no business being there. It might even be a good thing, but it has no business being the highest thing.
Yeah.
And thinking about how much of my life I've spent doing that. Is it a relationship? Is it money? Is it even spiritual things? Is it a successful Christian music career? Is it?
Yeah, it's funny how much we all agree the 10 Commandments are pretty much really good ideas. Like not lusting after your neighbor's wife or house. It's like, but actually like appreciating. I've been thinking lately that maybe happiness is just wanting what I already have.
Yeah, I think I've heard
in
that
some respect. It's a tension because you have to have hope and dream and vision for a fully rounded life, but it's got to start in going, oh wait, no, I do want this.
Yeah,
like
there's this thinker. I don't even know whether to call him a philosopher or what he is, but Slavoj Žižek. He's a Marxist.
I love it.
He's a Marxist. So like most Westerners are like, no, he doesn't have anything worthwhile to say. But he says this thing, and he said, happiness is a byproduct of serving something bigger. And he's like, you can't get to happiness by going directly at it. It only works as a byproduct of serving some bigger cause or bigger purpose or bigger meaning. He's like for the Christians
listening, C.S. Lewis kind of said the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people that have said stuff like that. But it's interesting to find that so many different people on so many different journeys start to see so many of the same things, because like so many of us, we feel like we're on this journey to try and find happiness, but maybe you've experienced this, like you obtain the thing you thought was going to make you happy and it just does not do it. Like I remember the first time I had a number one song, and that's the thing I worked towards for years. And when I found out that our song Drops in the Ocean went number one, what followed was one of the most depressing weeks of my life.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because the thing that I thought was going to make me happy didn't change my life almost at all. Now, not in the ways that matter, you know?
Right.
And then so there's the disappointment of that, but also at the same time, I was robbed of my graven image. I lost the thing that I was holding up as this ideal because I had accomplished it. So it's gone now.
Right.
And it also didn't do the thing that I thought it would. So it's like, it's a double whammy of like, oh, what now? And that was like a really good lesson for me to go like, you place these things in front of you as a motivation and something to work toward. And it's good to have goals and it's good to have things motivating you. But you have to also at the same time recognize that the journey of getting there is the thing. It's like getting there, the minute you get there, the goalposts move. And now it's a new thing. And so I mean, all of that ties together. I'd be curious because both of us have sort of been through this transition of like not really being in a band anymore. And that's after a long time of being in a band. And that looks a little bit different for each of us. But for you, I know like the last few years of your band, 10th Avenue North, you had, members leaving here and there, like I remember when Jason left the band and that was, I think we were on tour with you guys for Jason's last show, I think, right?
Well, we did his very, very last show was at a festival in Colorado.
Oh yeah. Maybe it was when
very, very last, but
maybe it was when you announced that he was leaving. Yeah. And then Ruben moved on at one point, right?
Yeah. Ruben, Brendan, our piano player, left to start an organic farming business with his wife in Florida. And then it was right before what was meant to be our spring tour this last year. It was like weeks before. My wife and I had a very serious conversation where she said, I need you to stop touring like this. And we had been sort of dialing back the number of shows each year because we were just going, man, we're all starting to have kids and just couldn't sustain the absence, And my wife, we had a really big conversation in February saying, hey, we really need to look at not touring anymore. Well, as soon as I came to the guys, this was a week before our tour was supposed to start. I said, hey, I'm really thinking about not touring anymore, like still doing shows, but just not being gone for weeks on end.
Yeah.
And it was like everyone was just waiting for me to say it. And Ruben goes, actually, I'm going full-time real estate. And Jeff goes, actually, I'm moving to Florida and I want to write for film and TV. And
wait, did Jeff move to Florida?
Yeah, he just moved.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Here you go.
Bye.
And so then in a week we had to rebrand our whole tour into the farewell tour because it came as a great shock to even us.
Wow.
But it was very amicable, but yeah, I have found myself in your position going, I used to have this group of people. Now it's just me. That's cool and lonely.
So lonely.
Thanks for calling me today, John.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you had this farewell tour that was sort of interrupted by COVID. So
yes.
How did that, I mean, obviously that wrecked. You probably had this image in your head of the farewell that you anticipated and you didn't get that. So how did that feel for you? And I mean, how did you bounce back from that? Or do you feel like you have, or do you feel like it wasn't like a bounce back situation? You just sort of rolled with it.
I would say I was probably the most depressed I've ever been in my whole life.
Really?
To be perfectly honest. Because like you said, we started the tour and I was weeping every night, like good cries, just looking around, savoring each show, going, this is it. And then it came to a screeching halt just as it started. And we lost a ton of money because we were all the way out in Spokane and we had to pay for the buses and crew and trucks. And so what was meant to be this really lucrative, beautiful farewell ended up, we're in the hole. The whole country shut down. All my friends are gone, and I want to say, like, I feel like for a lot of people, 2020 is presenting each of us with unique sorrow.
Yeah.
You know, there's a unique sorrow to a senior who didn't get to graduate, and a unique sorrow to, you know, someone who's been stuck because they're immunocompromised, stuck alone in their apartment for 6 months. You know, we all have these unique sorrows. My unique sorrow was that I didn't get to like end something well that I had started 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And for like a month, I just sat in my backyard and I started building onto my kid's tree fort. I like took half of it down and built it back up. And I'm not really a great carpenter. But I think I fell into that because it was really therapeutic. I think it was a symbol of everything around me was falling apart, but at least I could build this tree fort back the way it was supposed to be. And when that was done, I just kind of sat around and I just felt really sorry for myself. And then there's this thing that happened, and this is my chasing the beauty moment. I realized that because Jeff, our guitarist, he's more of a producer, and because he lived a mile away from me, whenever I had a song I needed to demo, I would just make Jeff do it, you know? And then there was a lot of songs that I never demoed because he didn't have the time and I didn't know how to do it. And it was about a month in, I kind of finally woke up and said, well, I guess I'm going to spend the last money I have in my bank account to build a little home studio so that I can actually like create my own demos. And it switched something in me where I've written more songs this year. And I'm sure a lot of songwriters have probably said this just because of the amount of time we've had.
Yeah.
But having my own little studio, the most prolific I've ever been. And the birthplace of that was really my depression and sorrow. And, so it's been cool because it's been a year of just writing songs that I've really needed.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start releasing them. And the cool thing is there really isn't this pressure for them to be huge hits or to speak to everyone, because I have a friend, he called songs like building life rafts for people.
Mm-hmm.
That
I know who
we
that
write
friend
these
is.
songs and they become life rafts for other people. And it was like I was building my own life rafts.
Yeah.
This year. So it was really satisfying.
Dude, that's awesome. I wanted to ask you, like, I know over the last 10 years or so, I've been sort of sensing things changing within Christian culture. And obviously for me, the last couple of years have been like just a crazy process. I wanted to get your thoughts on how maybe over time your perception of God and the divine and whatever word we want to use there, right? Like, I get the sense that your perspective has evolved as it has for many of us. And I kind of was curious, like, what that's looked like for you. And maybe if there's some things that you used to see things one way and now you kind of see them a different way. I'm sure there's lots of those things, but I wonder, like, as you've had time we've all had a lot more time to think this year than I think we've had in a long time. And I know the pandemic forced me to slow down and think a lot more about why I believe what I believe and how I came to, think the things I think and what effect that has on my life. And I wondered if there's been an element of that for you this year too, and maybe if you could talk about what that might have looked like.
Oh man. Yeah.
That's a big question, so feel free to take it anywhere.
It's such a big question.
Feel free to take it in any direction you want to go. I have no agenda there, so.
Yeah, first and foremost, I have a lot more patience for myself and for other people when they don't describe God or their faith with the exact words that I need them to use. Mm. That's going to feel like a cop-out for some people that I'm like dancing around.
No,
but
I think that's fair.
I think I'm really amazed with the idea that words are symbols, right? Like words are like there are attempts to wrestle down things that are much bigger and broader than words and just trying to have some connection point with them.
Mm-hmm.
Even when A.W. Tozer's got a book called Knowledge of the Holy, and he said, the first thing the Old Testament says about God is that he's kadosh or holy or other. So like the first thing you need to accept is that you're not going to have a whole handle on him. And I have just become, when it comes to discussions on religion and faith, I'm just a lot more patient with people. And I find that more and more I'm not interacting with them from a reactive place, but from a responsive place. Like I feel less and less like God is really needing me to defend him. It's like, you better do your job down there. And I get why people think of Christianity specifically that way. There's some admonishments in Paul's letters, like fight the good fight, be ready to defend, this hope that is in you. And so we take that to think that God needs our defending, when I think it's really interesting that Jesus doesn't defend himself. Mm-hmm. It's like the thing that is so frustrating when Jesus is, getting led to the cross. He's not speaking up, and even tells Peter, put down your sword. Like that's not what this is about. So getting a lot less defensive, a lot more patient.
Jesus also answers most questions with questions.
Well, what's really interesting, if you really study Jewish philosophy, is there's their holy scriptures. A big part of them aren't just the scriptures themselves, but the debates between rabbis.
I think they use the word midrash, right?
Yes, and the debate is what's sort of sacred, and I think that's fascinating.
I heard a Jewish person use this term, this phrase that I found so endearing. And I don't feel like it's normally my phrase to use, but I heard them say it, and as a self-description, and it felt so like quirky and funny and endearing. And they said 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And
that's amazing.
And I just thought like that speaks to the whole midrash. It's like the wrestling with it. I mean, like the story of Jacob is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Of Jacob wrestled with the angel and came away with a limp and also a blessing. And I find that really inspiring. It's like there's something about wrestling with this stuff that is, in a sense, what we are supposed to be doing.
Yes, the wrestling and the limp were the blessing.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think a lot of us would describe, man, I've just been really blessed by God. I wrestled with all my doubts about him, and now I limp. But I take that to mean, maybe wrongly, but I take that to mean, think about how much more tender Jacob is. If he's limping, you just have a different posture toward other people when you yourself need a crutch. You don't disdain what crutches other people need as well.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like the limp for me is a mark of truth, because it's like, I mean, none of us goes through this life without picking up some war wounds, and you see it in yourself, and it's humbling. It's right. Like, oh, I don't know everything, and I am not making my way through this world perfectly. I'm coming away with some bruises. And
yes.
And then you see that in yourself, and then you see it in other people. And you go, "Oh, you have some bruises too. Maybe I can be a little more kind about your bruises when I see where mine are coming from."
They're the Japanese art form of kintsugi, where it's like it's a pot that's broken and then they glue it back together with gold and silver. And the end result is it's more beautiful and more valuable than it was before it was broken. And the point of that is someone holding that pot, I trust them with me more than someone who's flinging around a plot that's never been broken. Right? There's a care and a tenderness. Like, I know what it feels like to be broken. And those are the kinds of people that I'm much more prone to get in a discussion about God with than the people whose faith doesn't have any cracks in it.
Yeah.
I'm like, ooh, I don't feel safe around you.
Yeah.
Because you don't bear witness that we all get broken by this life. And our hope isn't in our perfection, right? Our hope is in, there's this thing called redemption where the cracks are where the light gets in, right?
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
So I don't know. I don't know if you wanted like specific theological tensions that I shifted on, but that's more of an overview kind of thought.
Yeah, no, I've definitely, the last 2 years, I've studied theology a lot. I've studied philosophy a lot. I've studied evolution. I've studied physics. I've studied astronomy. I've looked at all of these things, and I know that there is a sort of community on the internet that loves to debate these things, and I think that's worth doing. Like, some people are passionate about that, and really defending, truth or the things that they see as true. And I learn a lot from those people, but I find myself coming back to the same question at the end of it all, of going like, I am a father, I am a husband, I'm a member of a community. How do I walk that out as best I can? And so, like, I feel like all of that stuff, philosophy, theology, all of those things, it's like, those things are interesting to articulate and contemplate, but I care about what you just said. I care about, like, recognizing the limp in ourselves and in the other person. And I don't remember where I read this, but I read this recently. It said, if you look deep enough into someone else, you see yourself. And if you look deep enough into yourself, you see the other person. And it's like, how does your theology and your philosophy, how is that embodied in your life? And that's what you just spoke to. And that's like what I care about. I care more about that than like, oh, are you like, do you believe in atonement theory? Or like, how much of the Bible is literal truth versus literary truth or metaphorical truth? It's like, that's interesting, but it's like, how are we going to live our lives and how do we treat each other?
It's hard for me to get excited about that debate with someone whose life, as we were talking about with the limp, their life is not marked with humility or patience or courage or kindness or, I'm like, well, your belief system is leading you away from all these things that I think are the most important things. There's a Puritan pastor named Henry Scougal who said, the end goal of religion is that the life of God would show up in the soul of man. Right? So if all these things that you believe so ardently aren't actually creating a place where God is showing up on you, I don't think I want your theology, because it's not making you better to be around.
Right, right. Well, it's like, what is your philosophy? What is your theology? How is that rippling out from you into your life, into the onto the people around you? Because it will. And
yeah, I think it's shocking. Like, The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite books of all time, because he kind of frames
it's literally my number one favorite book of all time.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. And he really flips the question, right? Because It's amazing how many people are so concerned with whether or not they're going to hell and never stop to consider, am I becoming hell?
Yeah.
Am I hell to be around?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my takeaway from that book, it's so strange. Like, some stories are just like, you read it and you feel like it's reading you, because every time you read it, you're bringing something new to the table. And so it's telling you something different in return. And the book hasn't changed. You've changed. And I think great art is that way. You know, any great art is that way. And so when I read The Great Divorce maybe every other year or something like that. And I didn't ever like decide, oh, I'm going to make this a thing. But I just find myself interested in it again, you know, every like 24 months or so. And I read it again maybe 2 months ago. And my takeaway this time was, the only thing holding you back from goodness is you. And the thing that is good, but not enough to occupy the top place as far as like God in your life, I guess you could say. Like, for those that haven't read The Great Divorce, it's basically this, there's a lot to it, even though it's a small book, but it's like, there's all these conversations that you're privy to of people who have the opportunity to experience heaven and to stay in heaven, but they're reluctant to stay because they're clinging on to some idea from their life that they will not let go of. And it's interfering with their ability to stay in heaven and to even want to stay in heaven. And that takeaway for me always jumps out. Like, it's like, I don't want to be somebody who is so stubborn in holding to the thing that I think is the thing, that I miss the actual thing.
Well, to bring it back to what we were talking about writing hits. Do you remember the scene in The Great Divorce where there's this artist?
Yes.
Who he gets up there and he's like, oh, this is amazing. It's beautiful. I got to go back to hell so I can tell everyone about it. And he has fallen in love more with the telling than the actual like being there. And I think sometimes you're like, I got to write a hit, that you're unable as a songwriter to actually write what's in front of you now and what you're learning now. And there's this opportunity for, cause I always am chasing that. Like, I want to write a song that teaches me something. And we have that offer to us, but we're like, no, it's gotta be this way. And so we miss out on the songs we could write because we want to manipulate it the way it needs to be, you know?
Right. I love from that little vignette with the painter in The Great Divorce. I love that the painter is asking like, oh, this beautiful scene that I'm seeing, I need to paint it. And it's like, and then he's told like, no, like the need for painting does not exist here because you can experience the real thing. It's like he's obsessed with the photocopy of the real thing. You know, he's obsessed with the painting of the real thing, so much so that he's missing the real thing. And so for me, I came away from that book being like, I don't want to miss it. I don't want to be so obsessed with the details that I miss the grandeur. I don't want to be so obsessed with what I think things need to be that I miss how things are. And so I was actually reading The Great Divorce this time from a place of feeling like I don't believe in God at all. And I came away from that book being like, I don't think that that's entirely accurate. Because there's something wondrous and mysterious about being. And maybe I'm hung up on words. And maybe...
Well, that there's a difference between being and documenting being.
Yeah.
Which there's a difference between God and all the words people have written down about who they surmise God is. Like, as you're talking, I was just thinking how Instagrammers are going to hate heaven.
Oh, it's so true. My wife
But
follows this.
I gotta show somebody.
My wife follows this Instagram account called Influencers in the Wild, and it's basically photos of people doing outrageous things that because they think it's going to Instagram well. And it's like, or like, it'll be like at a beautiful scene and everyone's like on their phone, like just like trying to get the right image. And like, I had that realization not that long ago. I think in my time with my kids, I was like, I am going to practice resisting taking an Instagram story of this moment. I'm just going to be in this moment, you know? And it's something I've tried to cultivate, and it's effort to do.
To stay on the C.S. Lewis train, I'm reminded of the chapter in the Screw Tape Letters where, Screw Tape Letters, for those of you who haven't read it, is like an uncle demon giving his nephew demon advice on how to tempt a human. And there's this chapter where he says, all right, nephew, get your guy to obsess about the future. He said, the past is good too. If you can't get him to like worry about the future, get him to obsess over the past. But the problem with the past is it's finite. They're going to run out of memories to obsess over. The future's even better because it's infinite. And he said, because we both know the truth, which is that the present is the only point where time touches eternity. And that statement is actually really, I don't know if you do this, but when I think about forever, I want to throw up sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, forever, never ending. And when I think about eternity just being now, like just actually fully now. Yeah. I don't know, that kind of, it helps me come to terms with it. But it also challenges me that I'm never going to see the future. The future will only ever be now. And so if I can't enjoy now, then I'll never enjoy the future, which will just be now later. Yeah.
One of the things along those lines that I've contemplated a lot this last year is because I went through a real heaven and hell phase, studying heaven and hell and different ideas on heaven and hell, where they came from. And the more you learn about it and where a lot of these ideas came from, even in like popular Christian culture now, it's like a lot of the ideas we hold about heaven and hell did not really come from Christianity exactly. A lot of them come from Greek mythology and Plato. And the more I sort of unpacked it, the more I was like, well, I don't have any certainty about what happens after this life. I have no idea. And so at first that gave me this sense of existential dread where I'm just like, oh, I have no certainty. I don't know anything about the future at all. When I die, I have no idea what happens. And that was terrifying for me at first, but I latched onto this quote from Avengers. And
fantastic.
Jarvis, in Avengers Age of Ultron, Jarvis is having this conversation with the last iteration of Ultron, the last little robot. And the robot says, they're doomed, And Jarvis says, yeah, I know. And they're talking about humanity. And Jarvis says, but a thing isn't beautiful because it lasts. And I was like, that's true. Everything that we hold dear, everything that we hold dear is beautiful to us because it's rare and because it's temporary.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
And because anything that we have in forever, in whatever quantity that we want, is meaningless. Things are only meaningful because they're rare. They're only beautiful because they don't last. And you don't come across them every day. And that changed the way I look at it. That's a really great way
to spin. You've spun existential dread into like a positive tone.
That's what I'm trying to do here, Mike. But no, it shows up for me.
That was like nihilism, positive nihilism. That's what you just did.
Well, it's like, I would say it's embracing uncertainty and the connection between beauty and not knowing.
Right.
So it's like I look at my kids and I don't know how much time I have with them. And that makes me cherish them.
Yeah.
That makes me cherish them so much more. Like when my son runs up and grabs my hand and says, you know, show me, which means I want to show you something. How can I not put down my phone? How can I not step away from what I'm doing and engage with my son? Because I don't know how much time I have. And when one of us dies, I don't know what happens after that. I have no idea.
Well, I want to add here, we've really gone so far, C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to stay the course here.
Sure. All right.
But just bringing it back to the Great Divorce, he kind of explains the Great Divorce in his book, Mere Christianity, because he talks about heaven and hell. And this really helps me because when we think of heaven and hell is it a place, you know? And I heard this great Tim Keller sermon one time about this idea. There's a famous quote that says, the gates of hell are locked from the inside. Right. And C.S. Lewis says in Mere Christianity that hell is the trajectory of a soul. He goes, we all agree that if you're bitter and you're always blame shifting and you're always the victim and it's everyone else's problem, everyone agrees that those sort of positions have really negative effects on a soul. It's okay, now let's say that soul doesn't just cease to exist one day. Let's say that soul goes on forever. If it does, then it only stands to reason that you're going to become more and more bitter and more defensive and more victimized on into eternity. Where he says, hell begins with a grumbling mood and carries on until there's nothing left but the grumble itself.
I remember that one.
And then in the same way, because some people are going to react to what you said about hell is just in Greek mythology, and they're going to say, Jesus told a parable about it. There's a rich man and Lazarus. But in that parable, what's so fascinating is, number one, Jesus comes up with that story to answer the Pharisees who are grumbling about him forgiving sinners. And he says, let me tell you a story. And he tells them a story. And what's fascinating is Lazarus in that story is the only character in all of Jesus' parables who has a name. He's the only one with a given name, like a proper name, Lazarus. Everyone else is the farmer, the servant, the son, the dad, blah, blah, blah. So you would think that the rich man would also have a name, but he doesn't, which is just super offensive to the Pharisees because the rich man, who's the man of prominence, who had an identity in that culture, doesn't have a name in the parable. So just at the very beginning, they're already offended. The poor guy's got a name and the rich guy doesn't. This doesn't make sense. And then what Tim Keller talks about this parable in this sermon, he says, what's fascinating, because people say, see, there's a chasm fixed in Jesus' parable so that the poor guy can't get into hell and that the rich guy can't get out of it. He says, what's interesting is that the rich man is told there's a chasm there, not when he's trying to get out of hell, but when he's trying to get the poor guy into it. Because he says, send Lazarus down here to give me some water because I'm in anguish. So what's fascinating is, and then he says, well, if someone from the dead, you should send someone to the dead, from the dead to warn my brothers, i.e. I didn't get enough information. So even in the afterlife, he's still spinning it where that poor guy should serve me and I didn't get enough information. It's still everyone else's problem, which goes back to what C.S. Lewis said. He's like, you want to enter out of hell into heaven, you just have to admit your issues.
Yeah.
And we would all agree that that's true right now. Someone who is honest about their mistakes isn't always unnecessarily playing the victim, who isn't overly defensive. We'd be like, that person is heaven to be around.
Yeah.
And that really helps me. Am I becoming heaven or am I becoming hell?
Yeah.
If I do go on into eternity, I'm going to end up in one of those spots.
Right. And
sorry, I talked a long time there.
No, I love that story. And I've looked at that parable a lot, actually, because it's sort of unique in all of Jesus's parables. And it's also sort of the one place, not the only place, but it's the only real place in Jesus's teachings that the sort of way that we Christian culture now tends to visualize hell. It's sort of the one place in Jesus's teaching where it like that appears to be what Jesus is talking about.
Right.
But I mean, there's been books written about that one parable, right? But I love thinking about the heaven and hell thing because I don't know what to believe about heaven and hell in eternity. I don't know what I think about that exactly. I mean, I kind of am skeptical of the whole schema because I see a lot of reasons why it would have been created as a human idea. But at the same time, I mean, you and I have both done work in developing worlds and seen suffering on like unimaginable scales. And then also like you're talking about, right here in America, talked with people who, wow, it seems like they're in hell right now. Like I see some of the things in the world and I go, how could I not believe in hell? I see it here, And then on the other side of the coin with heaven, like I feel some of those same things on that issue. Like I'm just like, there's some experiences in life that seem to transcend our normal experiences, They seem to take us somewhere else. And it's beautiful and wonderful. Right. And it's something we don't always have access to. We don't seem to be able to just go there on a whim. But certain things that we experience in life like carry us along into these spaces that only really make sense when you use some sort of religious language. Like you could talk about heaven or, the presence, the Holy Spirit. Like I think those experiences are very real for people, and that does seem to feel like heaven now. And so I love what you're talking about with the sort of nowness of the whole thing.
Well, I wrote a song on our last 10th Ave record called Heaven Is Now, which started as a conversation. Because it's fun to like theorize, but what happens when your kids, they just naturally, hey, what happens when I die?
Right.
And my 9-year-old was asking me, she's going, hey, how do I get to heaven? Cue Sinner's Prayer, which isn't in the Bible, by the way.
Yes, I've written about that as well.
Yeah, like seal the deal. This is my chance, right? And I said, well, did Jesus teach anybody to pray to go to heaven? Because that's what's so fascinating to me, right? Like we never see Jesus go, this is the prayer you pray to go get to heaven. But he says, this is the way you should pray on earth as it is in heaven. So he's like, pray that heaven comes here.
Yeah.
That should be your prayer. And so I said, well, listen, do you believe Jesus loves you? Yeah. Do you believe that he's put you on this earth to love other people, right? Love God and love others? Yeah. All right. Well, man, let's, why don't we just pray that because she was about to get out of the car at the school drop-off line, and she's hitting me with this like existential question. I'm like, what do I do? Yeah. I said, let's pray that you make your school more like heaven today. And she goes, instead of like praying to get there, why don't you pray to bring it around? And she's like, yeah. So she prays, I want to bring heaven to my school today, God. And then she ends up running for student council. It was like 3rd grade, Yeah. And her speech was all about how she was going to make her elementary school more like heaven. And this was weeks later. Cause I don't even remember if I don't even know if she remembered the conversation.
Right.
And here she is, she puts it in her speech and she ended up losing to a kid. She ended up losing to a kid who promised extra vending machines in the cafeteria. So she had an existential idea of making
Yeah.
her school more like heaven. He had a practical solution of bringing heaven to the cafeteria.
Yeah,
via
practical
more
way of bringing
vending
heaven
machines.
is more vending machines. But I love that, man. I love that whole image. But dude, I feel like that's a good place for us to leave this, man.
Yeah, we're going to end up talking forever. Let's be honest.
Dude, I intentionally, the way I'm recording my end, there's a limit to how full this memory card will get. And it's been a good limit for me. So we're bumping up against it. But dude, I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. And dude, I wish you the best in your solo music. And there's so much we didn't touch on, but I love everything you shared. So thank you for taking the time to do it, man.
Absolutely, John.
Okay, that was my chat with Mike. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope that we'll see you around again next week. There's some really interesting conversations coming up about sexuality and purity culture. And we have some really interesting conversations coming on those issues. So I hope you'll join us again in the future. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay curious.